Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest East Anglian branch IIRSM Risk webinar. I'm delighted to announce today that we have James McPherson speaking for us, who is a Director of Risk Fluent Consulting. This is a slightly different topic to those that we've tackled in the past, and one that I'm particularly looking forward to. And James has kindly agreed to talk to us on why I changed my mind on digitalisation of risk assessments and how to do it. So with no further ado, over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, and hopefully everyone can hear me all right and see the screen all right. And thank you very much, IIRSM, for having me on. So yeah, let's crack on then. So I'll give you a quick introduction to me first. So as Tony said, my name is James McPherson. I've been a safety professional for over a decade, and now kind of run a number of businesses, all within the realms of kind of safety, risk, and culture. I'll kind of introduce them really briefly. Don't worry, it's not going to be like an advert, just a little quick introduction. And I'll do it in timeline order. So first was the Health and Safety Network, which started about 3 years ago. And that's like a community for professional development. It's kind of like a mastermind community for safety and risk professionals, essentially. I co-founded that with two other consultants, Sam and Colin. And then Risk Fluent is kind of my baby. Founded that 2 years ago with my wife, and we run that now. And that's a Czech fire and culture consultancy business, and that predominantly is the line of work that we do. And then also we took over in March this year Risk Assessor, which is combination of Risk Assessor and Risk Fluent is kind of what we're here for today. It's all kind of in Risk Assessor branding, but essentially Risk Assessor is like a RAMS app, risk assessment and method statement. And we took that over from a couple of people that made it, who weren't safety professionals, but surprisingly did a very good job at it. And we've got a long way to go, but it's pretty cool in where it is. All of this started from something called Rebranding Safety. So Rebranding Safety is a podcast and a YouTube channel. It's been my therapy for a long time, if I'm honest. It's called Rebranding Safety for a reason. I think I battled myself with the brand of safety and how people perceive us. It's unofficially, because there isn't really a chart for safety podcasts, but it's unofficially the top safety podcast in the UK, according to a few bits and bobs. SHP voted us in the top 10 safety influencer in 21 and 22, and then we've got an international audience of plus 19,000 people, which still blows my mind. And really, even though this sounds a bit corporate, this really is kind of the core of all of that stuff. It is to really kind of rebrand that safety, health, environment and quality kind of approach that many of us have had into something that's really value add to businesses, and hopefully be a bit more people-centered and a bit more holistic. So everything that we do, Risk Fluent, Risk Assessor, Health and Safety Network, is really focused on kind of breaking that plateau that I think we've been stuck on for a long time within the safety space particularly. So let's move on then. So to put this into context first, we're going to talk about like the benefits of tech and my journey and how I think that tech is now going to be a big player in safety in the future. And I actually think it's going to break that kind of bit of plateau and stalemate we've been stuck in for over a decade now. To put that into context, it was only maybe about 3 years ago, I was still using a filer fax for everything. Everything was written down. Every book I had was hard copy. I'd never read on a Kindle because I like the smell of a book and to turn the page. I'd have to write it down in my filer fax, which me turning up as a 20, 30-year-old, whatever, with a big fat filer fax was always the joke of the room. And I've always struggled with tech, always. For many years, loads of people have said to me, oh, you need to get on Safety Culture or IIRSM, as it used to be called. You need to have a look at this or have a look at Evertix, all the amazing brands and companies out there that do genuinely amazing stuff. And I always just struggled with it. I always resorted back to Microsoft. And I've been myself on a journey, and I've come to a realization that hopefully I'm going to talk about today. But 3 things that really stick out for me with tech is that I actually think that if we embrace it in the right way, we can really enable risk-based thinking. I genuinely think we can enable us to be more people-centered. And I think we can fill a lot of the gaps in human nature and help us kind of break that plateau, like I say. So before we get into those bits, I think first we need to kind of unlearn safety a little bit, and we need to really understand risk and human performance a bit first. And this is really what Risk Fluent kind of do with a lot of our customers. And when kind of Risk Assessor came on board, it was like, oh my God, look, tech could actually help us here. So if we imagine the flow of a job, that's completing the job, it could be the beginning of a product from raw material through the machine to the end material, to the end product, or it could be a construction project. It could be absolutely anything. But if we imagine it like a flowing river, for example, like hopefully you can see on the screen, and if we imagine these black lines as the edges of failure, we don't want to go over these lines. If we go over those lines, we fail. And what we do is we operate within these. So when we're in a low risk environment or space, we have a lot of room with a lot of space to play with and a lot of flexibility, so to speak. And stuff's not really going to go wrong, or if it does go wrong, it's not going to be really bad. Then we have medium, where the banks get a bit tighter and we get less space to play with. And then when we're in the high risk environment, it gets really tight. And if something goes wrong and it's closer for us to cross those lines, and if it does go wrong and we do cross those lines, it's bad news. Now, it's important for us to think of a job like this flow of a river, because typically safety, or the approach to safety particularly, but a lot of that kind of check risk management, we look at it very much like we've done safety, we can crack on and do the job now. And we've done so many exercises of this where we kind of timeline out a job in a workshop with a customer, and then put all of the safety mitigations that they have for a process, and you can literally see it like a funnel in a way, and all the safety stuff is front end loaded. So it's like we've done safety, we can now crack on with the job. And we're not appreciating that a job is not just high risk or just low risk. There are some aspects to a job that is high risk and some that are low and some that are medium, and it kind of flows and it ebbs and flows, and we have to first accept that in our brains. And typically how many of us respond to this is by setting blanket rules. Now, if we set a blanket rule in line with the low risk side, so we're given a lot of autonomy, a lot of space to play in, it wouldn't work, right? And we'd all be like, well, that's stupid. Why would we do that? Or we would have nervous leaders, nervous people, because it'd be a lack of guidance, a lack of direction. It'd be so much variability. It'd be terribly hard to manage the consistency, and there'd be so much pressure on human reliability and competence, which is a huge issue for us anyway. So we wouldn't do that. That aside, we've also missing all of this gap here. So we've already gone over the lines of high risk, and we're nowhere near the boundaries of this blanket rule we've set. So it just wouldn't work, and we wouldn't do it. It's stupid, right? But what we do quite a lot is we set blanket rules to high risk. So if we were to go as a simple example, say this part of an area is high risk for hearing damage, let's wear hearing protection. Great. It's hard to manage, let's blanket rule it. Okay, I kind of get that. It's easy for us to manage. It's hard for us to, in the moment, kind of manage that line where we've crossed the imaginary line, so to speak, of now it's hearing protection time and not. So I can understand why blanket rules are attractive, but there's a trade-off to that. And the trade-off is that we can create really a lot of frustration within the workplace, because it can feel like we're restricted. It can create a high level of bureaucracy. It doesn't really help us with the variation and the flow of work. It can lead to a huge gap in how work is really done and how we think work is being done, which typically off the back of Deepwater Horizon kind of has been coined as work is done and work is imagined, right? And kind of what that means is that there's a lot of covert rule bending and breaking. You've got these rules in place and these procedures, but actually they're kind of not really operated like that in real life. So we've got this problem now where years of these kind of blanket rules and kind of restrictive approaches have created a perception of health and safety gone mad, which was kind of where I started everything in rebranding safety. I was like, oh my God, I've been part of this, and I don't buy into this. I don't think I've done this, but sometimes I have done that. So we've got this big challenge where this job risk level and the variance of the job, it flows like a winding river, and sometimes it's really tight and risky and bumpy, and then it's really wide and calm. And it's really, our risk management approach has got to flow with that. It can't just be, we've done risk assessments and off we go. So we've got a huge challenge there, huge challenge. Then we've got people, then we throw some people into this, and even more complex of risk, there's people. Now, this is probably one of my favorite models. So this is the dynamic safety model by Rasmussen. And in here, what we've got is, if you imagine this black dot in the middle is a person, right? So this is, it could be you, could be the person in boardroom, it could be the person with the circular saw, could be anything. And at any one time, this person is trying to avoid 3 types of failure. So if you imagine those river banks in that river, for example, they represent 3 different types of failure. Economic failure, e.g. us going over budget and smashing the profit margin and putting the business out of business. Resource failure, not having enough staff, not having the right tools, raw materials, and so on. Performance failure, safety, quality, environment, stuff like that, right? So what the business does is it implements people to push against that, and things to push against that, like risk assessments, procedures, policies, accountants, budgets, targets, objectives, staffing levels, tool checks, whatever. And these are the kind of dotted lines that are pushing away from this failure line, right? And this is a simplified version of Rasmussen's model, by the way, and you can Google it if you'd like to, and you can find the original very easy. But we create these things in business to push away from here. What this actually looks like in reality. Apologies. What this actually looks like in reality is that this dot just bounces around this kind of triangle, this weird triangle, and it sometimes we get really close to the economic failure, and sometimes we get really close to performance failure. And if we were to say things like safety first, for example, it kind of doesn't make sense, because sometimes we need to be close to the safety line because it's so low risk, but actually so high risk for economical reasons that it makes sense to just push next to the performance failure line, and vice versa. So we kind of bounce around this all the time, and our people, you, the board, they're all bouncing around, they're moving around this. So we've got the flow of the job or the decision or the process. Then we've got the flow of the person's mind, so to speak, as they're trying to avoid all 3 types of failure. And then we've got this kind of overwhelm and underwhelm part of the person as well. And these are just a couple of things that make this complicated. But if you were to imagine, say, a nurse, for example, and this nurse has got, I don't know, let's say 20% of their brain space, their cognitive load is taken up by normal life, right? And then they go to do normal work, just turning up at work, just being at work, just talking to people, socially interacting. All of that stuff can take a good chunk of our brain space, depending on who we are, whether we're more anxious, less anxious, whether we're happy at work, unhappy at work. It can demand more or less of our brain space, our cognitive load, right? And then we get a patient. A nurse gets a patient, and now we're active, we're doing a job that hopefully we enjoy, and we're engaged. And this is probably what Daniel Pink would call in his work. If you haven't read his, I can't remember the name of the book, but if you haven't read his book, it's really, really interesting. But he would kind of refer that as flow state. We're engaged, we're infused, and we're kind of enjoying what we're doing. We're challenged a little bit as well. Perfect state for us to be in. And then we get patient 2. Turns out patient 2 is really demanding. And now we're in a real kind of state of overwhelm, and we're likely to make a lot of errors here. We're likely to miss stuff and maybe get a bit emotional, react in the wrong way. Interestingly, we're just as likely to make errors down here in this, what many call in human performance, low arousal. We see this in train drivers and stuff like that, where the job's a bit monotonous and boring and we can fall asleep quite easy. Driving that sometimes on motorways can be very similar. Feel like you're getting real tired because you're kind of in that state of low arousal, and you're just as likely to make errors here as you are here. So now we've got this really complicated process where we've got the job itself is sometimes low risk and high risk. Then we've got, we don't want to fail over budget. We don't go under budget. Have we got enough people? Are we safe? Are we doing the right quality? How's a person feeling? Are they cognitively overloaded and underloaded? And all of this stuff can be like really hard for us to relate to. And if you want to kind of understand this a little bit better, particularly this cognitive load one, next time you're driving to a new place, say you're going on a little trip, a staycation in England, and driving to, say, London, you've never been to this place before, and you arrive kind of at your location. You just need to, oh, there's your hotel, but you need to work out how do you get into the car park, where are you going to park? You'll notice that you will automatically, or most people will subconsciously turn the radio down. You will just turn it down, whether it's podcasts, whatever, you will just turn the radio down. That's because your brain is saying, well, there's too much going on here now. I'm now driving the car. I'm looking for where I'm going, focusing on the stat nav. I'm also focusing on the traffic. It's a road I don't know. I don't know if this is the right hotel. I don't know where to park, blah, 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 blah. So your brain goes, it's too much, turn the radio down. So what this looks like in reality, all of this stuff, it looks like this image on the left. So the really interesting scenario is what we did with a site that was manufacturing glass, basically. And they kept having this problem where they kept dropping glass off of a forklift truck. It happening over and over and over again. So it was a real simple exercise. Forklift truck drivers, a couple of them in the room, a couple of team leaders, a couple of managers, a couple of safety people in the room, kind of sat in like a horseshoe shape, so to speak. And we just went around the room. One reason why you might not drop, one reason why you might drop the stillage with glass in it off a forklift truck. One reason, please, yours, and we keep going. You can pass if you want to, and we kept going until everybody passed in a row. Once everybody passed in a row, we stopped, and this is what we ended up with, this really messy sheet. And this essentially, in what human performance world is called context. And this is all of that stuff, the river, the overload, the culture, the organization, the human factors, all of this stuff. That's what it looks like. And that is a forklift truck driver's brain. And yet we turn the radio down just to find somewhere to park, right? So I've been dealing with trying to get my head around this for so long and writing it all down in my file of facts. I'm really struggling. How can I, as a safety professional, do this? Even employed roles and now as a consultant, it's the same. It's like, how have we actually got time to think and do and look at all of this stuff proactively? Because this was reactively, this was after an incident. So we got, well, obviously we need to get people involved in the risk assessment. Well, we know that that is really, really hard, but there's definitely a power in it, but we haven't got the time or the resources to do this exercise every single time. And there's also the benefit of hindsight to think about as well. And the problem is that because of all those reasons, the majority of risk assessments actually don't help us with that problem. They don't help us bring up all of this context and all of this stuff proactively. And that's a bit of a problem. My own issues, I suppose. So why kind of risk assessments for me have drove me insane for many years is that we're just not very good at them, but we should be, because essentially they are the core of the HSE's prosecution tactics. They're the core of good risk management. They're the core of our legislation. If you look at any prosecution, it typically says failure to have a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. Typically, safety teams hugely struggle to get the operational team involved. It's a real hard thing to do, to say, I'm going to take, 4 or 5 people off the tools, 2 or 3 people off the tools. Hard to get them engaged in it as well. Work, as we've kind of covered in the last few slides, is so complex that actually it's really hard to get a good risk assessment. And do we have all of the human and cultural factors in the risk assessment? Are they hazards? Are they we've never really had these conversations. Safety education not really taught us this either. So it's hard to do it right anyway. We talk about them being live documents and living throughout the process. It kind of just pays lip service to it. Actually doing that is actually quite hard. Most of our focus, unfortunately, is on the template more than the content. It's actually on the document itself and not the risk management, which is a real shame. And this isn't just kind of my anecdotal experiences. The HSE Science Division, or Laboratory as it used to be called, did a great paper back in 2003, which, if we think about it, is a long time ago now, called The Good Practice and Pitfalls of Risk Assessment. It pains me how many people do not know about this paper. It's called Report 151, Research Report 151, 2003 from the HSC. You can download it free of charge off of Google. Happy to email it out to anyone that wants it. And they highlighted a number of pitfalls in the way that the majority of people carry out risk assessment. I'll pulled out a few of them and put them on here. Carrying out a risk assessment in attempt to justify a decision that's already been made. If we just think about when we do risk assessments as an example, right, is typically the job's already been quoted, budgeted, planned. We already know how we're doing it. And now we've got to do the risk assessment before we start. It's kind of like we just need to check that box. It should be part of the planning process before all of that budget happens. It always frustrates me when I'll get a contractor ring us up and be like, "Oh, I can do some RAMs." And we're like, yeah, sure. Of course we can. We'll help you with that. We start in a week. And I'm like, what happens if I turn up and you go, you're going to need this whole thing to be scaffolded? Well, we ain't got budget for that. I think it's sort of thrown up in the air, right? Generic versus site specific, huge challenge for all of us, huge challenge, particularly if you're in that RAMs world. If you're not you're in like a manufacturing where the environment itself is probably a bit more static, then maybe this isn't that much of a challenge. But for construction, engineering, trades, where you're traveling to loads of different sites, this can be a big challenge when the work we're doing is kind of the same all the time, but the site changes. But we don't want to reinvent the wheel every time we go to site. That's a lot of time, that's a lot of resource, and that pushes us closer to that economic failure line, right? It costs a lot of money. Typically, a lot of our customers will call that small work. So we can't do a site-specific risk assessment. It's just small work. So it's only £100 for a job. We're only there for 10 minutes. Oh, yeah, that is a challenge. How do we risk assess that? Real hard thing to balance. Only considering one risk activity, construction is so bad for this. Like we've got plumbers RAMs, carpenters RAMs, brickies RAMs. We're not considering how those things kind of interweave together. The CPP is supposed to do it, kind of doesn't do it great because it's focused on just the production of the document, right? Not thinking about the societal risk or more focused on the individual risk kind of works with the one above, and also it's a big challenge as well, but to start to think about the wider site or the wider business or even the wider community as well. Oh, that's really hard to do, but definitely something that we're not very good at. Not involving a team of people that are doing the work, that's bread and butter in a risk assessment, but it's not easy to do. It's really hard to get these people out. I remember one of the best assessments I ever did was we had machine operator, machine area team leader, and someone from customer services and me. Oh, it's a great risk assessment. Got a nice bit of cognitive diversity, someone that knew the job, someone that knew management, someone that knew safety. Oh, it was beautiful. We only did it once. Because we just couldn't get the times and the logistics of all of that to work. Failure to identify all the hazards associated with a particular activity. I know that some of the jobs that we work on with our customers, and all of you probably work on, there's so many hazards. The risk assessment is supposed to record the significant ones, but then it feels weird not putting some hazards on there, even though, yeah, maybe they're not significant, but then define significant. It's not easy, is it? Inappropriate use of data. We're not very good at data in general in safety. Everything we do is based on the absence of accidents, and that's really all the data we've got. So we go, well, not had an accident in this in 5, 10, 20 years, so it's low likelihood, right? So we put the numbers down, which brings us on to the next one, inappropriate use of risk criteria. I've done it. I think we've all done it. We've been in that conversation where we've been under pressure because we've gone, if this did go wrong, yeah, it would be bad. It would be like a 4 or a 5. Yeah, but what's the likelihood? Pretty likely, actually. It's probably like a 4. Well, if we do that, that puts us in the red and we've got to shut the job down. Oh, yeah, good point. If we do that, Steve, the boss, is gonna go mad. Maybe it's not that likely. So let's put it like a 3 or a 2, maybe, and bring it down. Then it goes into amber. And then we can look at it later on. Yeah, I've been there. We've all been there. That's just life. It's us. It's us in that little diamond, that little triangle, trying to work it out, bouncing between all of these 3 failure lines. No consideration of as low as reasonably practicable, and not linking hazard with risk controls are probably 2 of the biggest bugbears for me personally. It kind of makes me laugh that the really eliminate is just kind of eliminated from the hierarchy of controls nowadays. I don't really ever see anyone go, could we actually design this out, or could we actually not do it like this? That conversation is rarely had nowadays. And even if you do bring it up, like we struggle, we bring it up with our customers and they go, well, no, we've got to do the job, got to work at height, got to do it. And it's like, yeah, but there might be another way to do it. Let's have a look at that. And it's really hard to entertain that conversation. Not linking hazards with risk controls drives me insane because it's so simple. But the amount of risk assessments I see that have a list of hazards and then a completely separate list of controls, and it doesn't tell me which controls are for which hazard. And all of this stuff was highlighted in 2003, and we've still not solved it, which is really frustrating. And I'm not saying all of us, I'm saying a lot of us, right? So where does tech come into all this then? Because James is just standing here telling us how crap everything is, and ultimately depressing us. But I think tech could genuinely be the answer. And I've gone on a big journey with this. Like I say, wasn't that long ago, I was still using a Filofax. And now everything I do is on this iPad. If I get any questions today, it will go on this iPad. Everything I do lives on this phone or on my laptop. I live on tech now. And what I've come to realize is it works. And we've just got to accept it, embrace it, and then we can mold it to how we want it. But the long story short is tech is the future, whether you like it or not. It's coming. So as a safety profession, we've typically been about 10 years behind everyone else. So it would be nice if we could be 5 years behind everyone else in this one. But let's suck it up and crack on and then embrace it. And if we embrace it, we don't run the risk of being like BlackBerry and saying, oh, but people like clicking the buttons, and then finding out 2-3 years later, everyone's on touch screens, right? If we view tech like a way to reduce admin and free up that brain space I was talking about, it enables us to do the things we've been trying to do for so long in safety, which is focus on the human and organizational, cultural factors in the workplace, right? If we think about, instead of going, oh my God, ChatGPT can write a method statement, but it's crap. Instead of going, oh my God, ChatGPT can write a method statement and it's about 70% okay. Well, that's 70% you haven't had to sit there and write. So it speeds you up. Less time safety professionals spend sitting down writing stuff, the better. The better we're outside. We're talking to people. We're doing what we should be doing. That, for me, once I had that glass smash moment and realized that, I was like, oh my God, why have I not realized this before? So for us to use risk assessments as an example, because that's what we do at Risk Assessor, but ultimately I've got some other examples later on of how tech has been used for other stuff. And like I just said, ChatGPT is really interesting. AI's got huge potential in this space. But if we were to focus on risk assessment, we need to really remember what it is and what we're trying to achieve. And I would say the same question for any form of tech. If you're trying to implement tech into safety to improve it, you need to get first very clear in what you're trying to achieve. And I would hope that you would try and keep it as people-centered as possible. But ultimately, if we were to bring it back to risk assessments, for me, a risk assessment is dead simple. Identify a hazard, identify who's interacting with that hazard, what the outcome of that interaction might be and what you're doing about it. That is it. No matrices, no nothing, no, just that. That is what we're doing. Where's the hazard? Who's interacting with that? What's that interaction going to cause? And what are we doing about that? If we remember that, then we could actually develop good bits of tech. And there are, not just us, there are other people out there that are doing a good job at this. Once we remember the core intention of what we're trying to achieve, the app or the tech then just becomes about speeding that process up and recording that process. It becomes providing guidance and nudges and ways to improve you and give you more timely reminders of stuff, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute as well. It helps us with that admin trail of managing and recording reviews and sign-offs and things like that, which is a bit of a pain in the butt, right? Oh my God, this hasn't been signed off, I need to print it out, and then we lost a bit of paper. If we can just do that on tech and it just pings it straight to where it needs to, it's less time of you just chasing paperwork or filing paperwork, right? And the analysis of data, which is where I think AI is going to really start to help us and do a lot of stuff that we're not very good at, which I will talk about in a minute as well. So once you've kind of realized all of that and you choose an app or a piece of tech, and that's doing all of that admin stuff, you will start to see a chunk of your time given back to you, but also a chunk of your brain space as well, that cognitive load. So you can start to do what you're good at, which is using your creative brains of a human to start thinking about the complexity of work. You can now start to observe all of these interactions and start talking to people to understand that messy picture of that forklift truck example I gave you. You can start doing that and having that conversation and facilitating that conversation, and because you're not focusing on the production of the document. You can start identifying all of those cultural human factors because you're not focused on having to write for the next 2 hours this piece of paper, for example. And I genuinely believe that tech can not only just make us quicker, but also just alleviate that brain space. That alone for me was a glass smash moment. But then as the more and more as I think of it, the more and more I see what people are doing, because we're in a really lucky space in rebranding safety where people that are coming up with cool ideas, they want to come on rebranding safety and talk to us because they want to tell the rest of the world about what they're doing, right? So I'm really lucky I get to talk to all of these people. And there's an amazing piece of tech out there called Spacebands, which essentially, they were really popular during COVID. They were like looked like an Apple Watch in a way. And they were used for physical distancing during COVID. And if you went near people, they would beep, right? Dead simple piece of tech. End of COVID in quotations, but end of that period of pandemic. And they've got a product that really no one really wants anymore. So they were like, what do we do with it? And now they're making this amazing piece of kit that can start giving us prompts and warnings when we're entering an area that's got a loud noise, for example. Or say I've got some customers, a lot of customers that work at some serious height, and they need to constantly assess the weather. What if they had a little watch on that went, weather forecast says, you're about to get a storm, for example, right? And it can do that live. That's amazing, right? If we were to think about, these are examples of nudges on the screen that you can see now. If we were to think about a few of these, like warnings and graphics, for example, we've been quite good at that at safety over the years, but our warning posters have kind of become a bit like wallpaper. What if we could do that in the moment that you're just about to touch that guard or touch that machine or walk into that space, and then it goes ding? That's a perfect nudge. That is where tech can really start to change the game, I think. The other stuff, simplification, ease and convenience, I've kind of spoke about, but ultimately, if things are simpler and they're easier and they're convenient, people are going to do it more. And I think if we look at social norm, which is just at the top of the screen, the social norm currently for safety is that it's all about paperwork and it's bureaucratic and it's slow and it's annoying. If we can nudge people gradually using tech and helping them by making it simple, making it easy, making it convenient, the new social norm becomes, wow, this is actually helping us generate some operational success. We can start to work in some defaults of like, this is the default position of something or the default control measure. You can start to put that stuff in place. Now we start seeing like, oh, we can actually start giving the risk assessments or this process to somebody else because you can set all of that stuff behind the scenes. Then your job is to actually just look for the tweaks and look for the differences. And I think the next step, the future, the big step, because I think all of that tech stuff of making it easier, the nudges, and most of that's kind of here now, and we can utilize all of that stuff. There's definitely tech out there, whether it's CRMs, whether it's our risk assessment app, whether it's Hands HQ, the other kind of popular, probably the leading risk RAMS app. All of these things, they exist to make your lives easier and quicker, and then it's on you to use them in the right manner and be people-centered and so on. But the next step is where I think AI can really make a difference. And I know nothing about AI. This is just me kind of going, oh, this is interesting. But I think it could help us make some better predictions, which is something we're not very good at as humans because we've got too many biases, right? you'll know what it's like with you. I'm a big rugby fan, but I genuinely think Northampton Saints are going to win every single game that they play, because I have a bias, because I love them, right? I absolutely love them. Currently just getting into Formula One because I'm watching Drive to Survive. I genuinely think that Haas are going to win everything. When they don't, they currently lose everything. I don't know what it's like up to date now because I'm still just on the Netflix show, but ultimately they're terrible, but I just really love them. And I've got bias that I want them to win every single time. We're bad at synthesizing lots of data. I had a really good example of this when I worked in a housing association back in my employed time. We had loads of data, and this data said one simple thing, that all of our fires are from domestic cookers, yet we were doing nothing about that. The simple solution was, can we provide furnished flats going forward and take control of that risk? Oh, I've never thought of that, but it's there in the data. But it's really hard to see. I'm not saying I'm amazing at data, I'm actually really bad at it. But ultimately, it was there and it was well organized. You just needed someone to go and look at it. Well, we're really bad at synthesizing all of that data. And we're actually bad at knowing which factors are important, which is interesting because if we look at risk matrices, that's what we're asking us to do, which is weird, right? We're not very good at it, but yet we're asking ourselves to do it. What if we could get a bit better at the safety data, granted, but ultimately, what if we did have risk assessments being put into one place, method statements being put into one place, checks being put into one place, and incidents being put into one place? Just 4 things there that we currently don't consider as safety data or monitoring, right? They're just what we do, right? But we don't consider them as monitoring. We would consider the accidents and incidents and near misses as monitoring, but probably not the others. What if we put all them into the same place and there was an AI now that was looking at all this stuff? On the risk assessment, you say you're doing this, but actually I can clearly tell on the checklist and the incident reporting, we've got a conflict. Flag that up, tell James, the safety guy, oh, you might have a problem here. Go and look at this. Oh, God, I never spotted that. It's this live reviewing of a risk assessment every time we're having an incident without actually stopping work, going and reviewing the risk assessment. Now, for me, I'll start to see AI as it grows, as it's evolved. If we can take hold of it and we can guide the data, if that makes sense, we can really influence what's going in it, because you put crap in, you get crap out, essentially. Then I genuinely think that this could be amazing, and it could genuinely start to highlight predictions, I think, say, based off of the last 10, 20 years of data, I think we might have a problem here in the next couple of months. Jesus, I never thought of that. How exciting is that now as a safety professional, that we've got something sitting in the background just going like Sherlock's brain, just kind of looking at everything and then going, hey, look at this. That's really interesting. I think all of that alleviates time for us to be better at just being humans, right? But we can only do that if we let tech be tech and humans be humans, and stop treating it like they're conflicting with each other and competing with each other. Stop treating it like it's the Terminator and Skynet coming to destroy us all. If we stop seeing it as a threat, then I genuinely think it could be an amazing thing. If we approach the building of that tech in a people-centered way, then I think it could be an amazing thing. As a really good example of this, there's a lot of CCTV AI tech coming out. And we partnered with Protex AI back on a while ago on rebranding safety. And I had a lot of people at the time approaching us saying, we've got this AI that analyzes CCTV and then tells you when people are being naughty, and then it tells them off. And I was like, oh, no, I don't like that. That's horrible. Great. We've got an AI that whips a person now. That truly does sound like Terminator. And then Protex approached us and I was like, no, I'm not interested. And I'm like, no, hang on. We do it a bit differently. We're a bit more kind of people-centered. We try and coach our customers to use our AI to collate loads of data and have a look at things and spot where you might have gaps. I'm like, now that is how we use AI. That's how we can use tech. With a people-centered approach, it could be phenomenal. And in that case, if we do it like that, I genuinely have been converted in my own approach that it could be the best thing for safety. thank you very much. I hope you've got some value out of that. I hope there's some thoughts being provoked or something you can go back and take back to your jobs with, or whatever it is that you do. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, James, for an excellent presentation. Somebody asked if you could share the research paper, but somebody's kindly shared a link to it in the chat. We have had a couple of questions. Please bear in mind these questions could come from the UK or outside the UK, because we do get an international audience. So the first one is, how do we convince the regulators who are still using the traditional methodology and records that by using technology and digitalisation in risk assessment that we are still complying with the regulations?
Great. Good. Well, good question to start off with. One I'm not sure I have the answer to. I think that ultimately we're in a period of change, right? And typically I find, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, that our profession isn't great for embracing change. So for me, there's kind of like, I think we kind of need to suck it up and go, this is going to be difficult. And there is something to be said to have in this period of change, which is contradictory to kind of what I've said, a little bit more bureaucracy for the short term is to gain for the long term, if it makes sense. So what I mean by that is by saying that we might have this safety management system that's not really for real work. It's actually just for demonstrating to auditors and insurers and stuff like that. And then having this world where this is the real risk management, if that makes sense. And this is how we really do it. So kind of protecting the shop floor and the operations from the bureaucracy, if that makes sense, but accepting that we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we are kind of where we are. We might have to teeter between the two worlds. I will add to that, though, that most tech that I experience are very aware of the need to demonstrate compliance. And I do think you can probably balance that a little bit better with tech. I can probably only really comment for the ones that I've experienced, which would be kind of my own, and then a couple of others, like the more CRM side of things. And then I'd say the other, I had something else that I was going to say, and it's just left my brain. What was I going to say? That might come back to me. Apologies. There was something else I was going to say to that question, and I've completely forgot.
Don't worry, shall I read the next one and hopefully it'll come back to you?
Yeah, hopefully it'll come back.
I do that all the time. So the next question is, could AI be integrated into the app to suggest hazards and controls, prompting the user with questions to provide better risk assessments?
This is going to be a shameless plug. We've actually just done this with Risk Assessor. So you can actually download that Risk Assessor and start doing that. So we've actually integrated ChatGPT into the app. I don't know if any of the other risk assessment apps have done that. They might have, and if they have, awesome. It's still in its infancy. I think that AI and ChatGPT is still learning. It's learning a lot quicker in other spaces because there's not a lot of safety people or safety questions being asked on it. So it's not the best, but how our amazing tech team have done it is pretty good. So essentially on our app currently, you can build your own bespoke hazard libraries and stuff like that. But then if you're unsure, just need to get, maybe you've got writer's block or something, you can prompt your thoughts or check if you've missed anything by just putting in like keywords like construction or drilling or work at height or ladders or something, and click search, and the AI will come up with a list of hazards, and then for each hazard I think it produces 3 example control measures. So that tech is there. And outside of my app, like kind of outside the shameless plug, you can actually do that in ChatGPT as well right now. You've got to play around with it a bit and learn how to ask the questions, which I think will be a key skill in the future for any professional. But ultimately, you can go on ChatGPT and do exactly that now. Be like, hey, can you give me some examples of common hazards and control measures for that hazard when working on a construction site in the UK? Then it will give you that. Make sure you say in the UK, or if you're in America, say in the US, or wherever you are in the world, so that it knows to look for UK legislation or your area's local legislation as well. So yeah, our app's got it, but you can also use ChatGPT for that now. Additionally, if you haven't done it yet, just to kind of check things out, go and ask ChatGPT to write a method statement or a procedure on something that your business does. And if you approach it with an open mind, I think you'll be quite impressed as to what it can do.
Great, thank you, James. Now, we've still got quite a few questions. We'll ask as many as we can, but I don't think we've got time for any more, but let's see how we get through with these. How do we get top management to embrace what I see as a paradigm shift in conducting risk assessments at work?
Oh, Jesus, where's that? What's that?
That's on the Q&A.
Oh, I didn't see it. All right, so can you read that again for me? Sorry.
Yeah. How do we get top management to embrace what I see as a paradigm shift in conducting risk assessments at work?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think it's the same as we're in a period of change. You're essentially driving that change. And this actually, thank you very much for this question. This reminded me the other thing I was going to say for the other question earlier. I think there's this feeling that leadership has got to go first for all of this change. Now, I'm not saying that we don't want our leaders to help us drive change in a business, and even if it's in a profession, our leaders might be professional bodies like IIRSM, IIRSM, or even the HSE, right? We always kind of think that they need to go first. If they go first, it happens a lot quicker and easier, 100%. But when we're talking in the context of a business, particularly, more often than not, we need to prove to the leadership that this works. So one of my favorite ways to do that is little micro experiments. So if you're trying to prove that risk assessments are helpful, instead of going, can we do it this way for the entire business? Because as a business owner, you probably see that as a risk because you're very comfortable with how you are. I would say target one small department of the business that you know you can get your teeth stuck into. It'd be a bit of a challenge, and then prove it there. And then don't go, we've done it in one place, let's do the whole business now. Then get another one that's maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit more challenging, and then say, look, we've done this twice now and it clearly works. You kind of got to prove your worth first. For the bigger change in profession-wise, I think that if we're doing it and we know it works and they see that, yeah, safety is just better, I think the HSE will catch up with us and other professional bodies. If they're not with us, then they'll catch up. So hopefully that kind of answers both questions in one.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, can you use this for risk registers for construction?
So I assume that's our app that they're on about. Yeah, so essentially, you kind of produce all your risk assessments as you go through, and then that kind of monitors it and produces the risk register itself as a register of those assessments, if that makes sense. And then also it pulls all the data out for the specific hazards as well. So if you're looking at like literally a list of all the tasks you do, and then does it have a risk assessment, yes or no, kind of doesn't do that, but it does in a way in that you've got all your risk assessments there, and it will tell you where it is, does it need to be reviewed, has it been signed off, and all of that. And then it also does extra by taking all of the data out of that, telling you which hazards are being selected the most and which are being marked as high, medium and low, which is where I think the data gets a lot more interesting. But yes, in a nutshell, yes, it does. And I believe the others do that as well, just to be fair, just to say I'm not just standing here promoting my app. I'm pretty sure Hands HQ and rams.com do that as well.
Okay, thank you. So this is a two-part one. It comes in an observation or a question. So the observation is, as someone who reviews contractors' RAMs, I often see the use of generic RAMs that have been developed using an online system. It is clear that the risk assessor has not assessed the risk the operators will be facing on one of my sites, and the MS does not reflect the work to be done. So the question is, how do we stop this auto/AI generated RAMs that are, in my opinion, a waste of time?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. I think if that's a Phil Clark that I know, then hi Phil. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we've got multiple challenges here. So it's not always the fault of the contractor. So a lot of our customers, we've got customers on both sides of the scale. We've got customers where my company is kind of helping proof the RAMs, and then we've got customers where my company is helping write the RAMs, if that makes sense. And typically on the contractor side of the producing the RAMs, they always ask for the RAMs before the job starts. Makes sense. Totally get that. They're rarely given enough time to go on site and actually do a site specific one. And they're rarely given enough allocation of budget to do that as well. So we've got this race to the bottom for we pick the cheapest contractor, and then we kind of bitch and moan that they're not going to site and doing a site specific risk assessment. So there's a bit of a conflict, a goal conflict there, if that makes sense. How do we stop people just utilizing AI for generic RAMs? I think again, it's just a time thing. I think the more we use it, if we keep accepting it, then it's going to keep happening. And in our experience, every new customer we get on and they go, our RAMs are pretty good because they get accepted on nearly every site. We get them, and it might sound like we're just being arrogant, but like ultimately, I'm yet to see one customer we've had come on board that produces good RAMs. And these are getting passed by some of the biggest companies. With the biggest safety teams that are all over LinkedIn saying how amazing they are, and the RAMs that they're improving are frankly terrible. So I think the more we challenge RAMs, but challenge it in a constructive way by going back to that contractor, instead of saying, this is rubbish, go away and do better, but go in there and saying, this is rubbish, can we help you? Because we're a massive safety team and you're clearly not. Then I think we could change it over time. But if we accept it, we're going to keep getting it.
Great, thank you. And I think this is the last question, which we're back over in the chat now. So if I've missed your question, okay, apologies. So how have you found that the digitalisation of assessments works with larger companies that have the tech available, where smaller companies may not change due to not having the tech to do this easily?
What's a larger companies are the tech available? Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting. So I don't know about, interestingly, with the smaller companies, the main two questions they want answering is it cheap and is it quick? That's like their main driver. And as a small business owner, I kind of get that, right? We don't have a lot of money and we don't have a lot of time. So the smaller businesses tend to actually, as I'm being told, is very cost effective. I don't know what the others price, if I'm honest. And they typically have not had tech in the past. So the smaller companies actually embrace it a lot quicker. The larger companies, I find a lot harder to embrace the tech, if I'm honest, and primarily because ultimately what normally happens is they've already got a shed load of tech already in the business, about this CRM and that CRM. And we've actually said a couple of times, particularly on the consulting side of the business, where one of our existing customers has said, oh, I want to check out Risk Assessor, we demo it, and they're like, oh, I love it. And I'm like, yeah, but you've already got Evotix and that kind of does it. So why are you paying us and then paying Evotix? We might as well just use Evotix, for example. And there is a fine line between like having too much tech and it's actually not achieving stuff. So instead of us having a shed load of paperwork, we've now just got a shed load of apps. And I think there is also something to be said about having a single front face, even though it's different apps, but having all the, I think it's called APIs, so all the apps look like they're working together, is a big thing as well. But typically the biggest problem with larger companies is that they have too much tech. The smaller companies tend to not have much, and it's really just a budget question. I hope, Tony, that answers your question. If it doesn't, apologies.
Great, thank you, James. You've done a marvellous job with so many different questions.
No, thank you for the questions. It was good to have them.
We've had lots of, Tony's just sent a thank you. We've had lots of thank yous, great presentation. Tony, do you want to come back on to do your closing comments, please? I've just sent you an unmute, Tony. I think we might.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. I'm on now. Yeah, on behalf of the IIRSM East Anglian Branch Committee, I would like to thank you, James, for an interesting and thought-provoking webinar this afternoon. What I will say is, of all the webinars that we have conducted since we launched last November, that is by far the most questions that we've ever had at the end of a session. So I think that
Oh,
shows
wow.
the
Thank you very
importance.
much.
I think that shows the importance of where we're moving to. And what I liked about it, because I've worked in the business, well, for about 25 years up until recently. And one of the biggest challenges I always faced in the boardroom was human, organisational and, cultural factors. So I think the factors where you're looking at those issues as part and parcel, as well as embracing technology, is obviously a way forward for profession. So yeah, I mean, an absolutely brilliant webinar. Really, really interesting, with some takeaways, I think, for a number of people. And now, if I can, I would just like to mention a couple of things about our branch activities. We will be taking a short break during August because obviously it is the primary holiday season. We will be back on Monday, the 4th of September at 8 o'clock with Justin Sebastian Strange, the UK Health and Safety Manager at Go Brands. Justin is a member of the IIRSM East Anglian Branch Committee, and he's going to be delivering a webinar on how to create a safety culture in hospitality. Likewise, for a year running, L'Oreal and IIRSM have partnered to launch the Hummingbird Bursary. If you look on the IIRSM website, members can apply to gain limited place on the IIRSM Managing Risk, the Essentials course, which is being held in September. The closing date for those applications is actually the 31st of July 2023. But take the opportunity to look at the website. And once again, on behalf of myself and Jonathan Reynolds and the rest of the committee, we thank you once more, James, for an excellent presentation. And with that, I'll say good afternoon, Julie.
Good afternoon, everyone.